Hello and welcome back. Last time we talked about a few of the commands that you'll need in order to just get started programming on a terminal interface. We talked about man, which is the manual for your programs inside the terminal, cd to change a directory, ls to list files and directories in your current directory, print working directory to get your current directory that you're in, and echo, which just prints whatever you give it to the terminal. And one that we talked about, or that I mentioned, and we're going to be discussing today was apropos, which, if you don't know what command you need, you can give it a description and it'll show commands that have that similar description, which might be the command you're looking for. And I kind of mentioned, I used it and I didn't explain it, which was my apology to have done that. But again, if you wanted to know how it worked, you can just type man and then time. I mentioned time. Time just times how long a command takes to run. And so those being the commands that I mentioned. One thing to look out for in Zish is that time doesn't work the same. It's one of those ones like, oh, I also mentioned wince. So like wince time tells you which time you're using. Just like if I say wince echo. These are built-ins. But if I used one that's not built-in, and I'm kind of very wary about introducing those. So again, if you want to know how any of these work, you just type man and then the command. But one that isn't built in is clang. It's not a built-in command to the terminal language, Zish. And you can see that this is where clang lives. It's a compiler for the low-level virtual machine compiler language. It's C-lang, clang. C is a programming language, and clang is a compiler. Some people say C-lang, I say clang because it's funny. So, I'll talk more about apropos. So, you don't know what command you want to use, but you know what you want to do. Say you're looking for a command that'll help you find a file. You don't know where it is, you just know that there's probably a file with a name somewhere, but you don't know where. And there's a lot of files you have to look through. So, you know you want to find a file. If you say apropos and then find a file and hit enter, it'll give you all these things that find files. And there's a lot. You can see that there's a lot that mention this phrase in some capacity. So you can refine that by saying maybe find a file by name. And you can again see that there is apparently a lot. So if you have this issue, maybe it's that you're not being specific enough in file in current directory. God, maybe find isn't a good example of this. Because again, a lot of what command lines do is parse for files. So maybe a better alternative for anybody that doesn't know would be to just Google. So look for it online with a search engine. So if we say Google Chrome, it will open it, and we can just say how to find a file in Linux. And this is a totally valid way of looking for a solution to this if you do not know. Because again, apropos, it's a very useful tool, but again, I seldomly use apropos to find a command. If I'm doing something, I usually look online first, because you might not find the best solution to doing this. So see, they suggest the find command here. And again, if you don't know how it works, you just type man and find. And here it is. I wonder if you typed apropos and just find, if it would have suggested find. This seems to be a lot shorter of a list. So maybe that's my misunderstanding about exactly how apropos works. But see, you can find the find command in this, and also locate. Find and locate are two good built-ins. Locate may be better because it uses a database on the back end, and I don't know if find uses that same database. There's also FD, which is a more modern version of find, but this isn't a built-in. And then the one I use is FZF, which isn't exactly a find, but it's a parser that uses a input from a different command, which maybe we'll talk about in a later time. How to set up FZF and fuzzy finding. But right now we're trying to get to programming. And it's funny that we haven't even really, we have discussed this is technically programming. So this language and these commands you can think of as little functions that you can manipulate with a programming language that we've been using, which is Zish or Bash, your shell's scripting language. That's how your system uses these little programs. Like even Chrome is a program that you can run from your command line. So if I type Chrome, it's Google Chrome. See, Google Chrome stable is the program that runs whenever I run Google Chrome. If I run it from here, it'll also spit out a lot of like messages in case this one doesn't really talk a lot to the terminal apparently, but when you run commands like this in the terminal, it'll usually sometimes spit out extra debugging information into the terminal. Or you can tell it to open a file, like say I have in my documents a documents program and web. So I have in here a basic file page that I can tell Google to open, and all it does is say this is some text. That's all this web page says, but you can tell Google to open it. But that's neither here nor there, just to show that all your programs can be run from the terminal. So apropos being that, and then time was the other one that I briefly mentioned. It's not the same as on Bash, so I'll open up another one and go to Bash. So if I do time echo hello, you can see this information. It doesn't take very long. I'll introduce one more command, which is the sleep command. The sleep command, all it does is tells the terminal to do nothing, hold for this many seconds. So if I say do it for 1 second, it waits a second, and then it pops back up. Your prompt pops back up. If I say 2 seconds, it'll wait 2 seconds before the prompt, and so on and so forth, 5 seconds. And that can just run. But time doesn't work the same here for built-ins in Zish. In Zish, any built-in command can't be timed in and of itself. So it's like trying to run 2 built-ins at the same time. They don't mesh. So if you do this, all it's gonna say, if you do this without these parentheses, that's the secret. All it's gonna do is run the second command. But if you run it with parentheticals around the second command, and I suggest that if you're doing any timing in Zish, that you just use parentheticals around the command you're trying to time. It'll do the timing here. It's displaying in a different format because a format string in the Zish environment, in this environment, is telling it how to print this, and likewise here. But usually you see it like this in Bash and like this in Zish. So, and again, if you wanted to time, you don't need parentheticals. Even though both time and echo are built-ins to Bash, they don't conflict, and I don't know why they don't work the same way in Zish. These are just those nuanced differences between these two scripting languages. But just to demonstrate that you can still do it, you can do it the same way. And again, it's more succinct to do it this way because you're saying time and then time this. This is what you're timing. Whereas if you do it like this, it's like time echo, time what? Okay. It's just more succinct to do it in parentheticals. So now we know how to move around. That's what we've gotten now. We know how to move around in the command line, which is all well and good, but we don't know how to write anything to a file. So we need to have a file that we can write to. Now you could do that through either any kind of text editor. So a lot of people have Notepad or Pages or Word or something to write text in. So you need maybe even LibreOffice. So if you have LibreOffice, which is just like a free alternative to the Office suite you find in Windows, the Microsoft Office suite, you have a writer document and okay. So this is a file in which you can write some text. This is text, if I could spell. Anyway, and then you can save it, and down here we want to save it as just a text file, an ordinary text file. Now if you did this on a Mac, you'd use like Notepad, or not Note. Well, Notepad works on Windows, and Notes on Mac. Anything that edits text. And I think if you open just a plain text document in Microsoft Windows, it'll just open it in Notepad by default. So you can just save this as file, first file, and then if we save, I'm going to make sure it saves to my desktop because I want to use my desktop as like the example directory. Okay. And I'm just going to double check that it's in my desktop. I don't even know if it's saved. File. This is not how I normally do these things, but if you've never done these things, this is how I do it. So if we go again to desktop with CD and we go to desktop, Whenever you're in the command line, if you press tab, it'll complete some of the directory or the file you're trying to get to. So I only had to type DE and then press tab and it'll complete this. So you can see file text there. Great. So this is file text and this is what's in file text. This is text. But how do we look at that? Well, there are a lot of ways in which we can look at this. For instance, I'm trying to think of what would be the best way to do this. We're going to have to introduce a new command. So let's see if we can't find it. So if you're in the command line, it doesn't hurt to just do apropos. Otherwise, you can just look it up in a search engine, how to view a file in the command line. It would show you. But you do apropos and then view, maybe if we do a string like view a file. Okay, it doesn't like that. View a file. This is really, I don't frequently use apropos, but these commands are like you're not even gonna want to look through all of these. So what do? Again, you can just go look it up on Google or whatever your preferred search engine. But the command I'm going to introduce is cat. And there's a better alternative that's not part of the Unix system or Linux system, which is bat, which is it's just a better version of cat. And there's always going to be like a command that's probably better than a system command. But the built-ins are the ones that you should learn, so we're going to use cat. So cat, again, man cat. Concatenates files and prints on the standard output. So the standard output is just the command line. So if we say cat and then the file, we get what's inside the file. And there's also other things that you can do with cat, like creating a file out of two files. It just like sticks them together, which is what concatenation means, and that's what cat is an abbreviation for. Concatenate. And then you got the commands and examples. I like that usually there's an example section. So if you wanted to cat F and G, outputs F's contents, and then standard input, and then G's contents. So if you put a hyphen in here, I guess it allows you to type, because that's what standard input is the input to the command line, which is usually your typing. You can also, whenever you get into more advanced things, such as how operating systems work, and specifically how Unix and Linux work with piping output to different programs. So it gets into how your operating system actually moves information around. But that's a little later on in a university course, operating systems. Maybe your junior or senior year, you would study operating systems. So we can cat the file, and we get this inputs. And if we go over here and change it, another part. So we say another part and then save. You always have to save, because that's at that point is when whatever is in the file is saved onto disk. And actually it's like stored in memory first. So it's written to memory, and then if we do this again, it'll update and say what it is. And just to demonstrate that if I typed some stuff in here and didn't save and went over here and did this, it wouldn't change. You always have to save in order for that to be true. So You can write your code in an editor like this, and I'm not a zealot for how you write code or whatever. A lot of people have a specific way they like to do things, and so that works for them. What works for them might not work for you. Maybe you prefer to write text in a document this way, but you you probably want to learn tools that programmers use professionally. And I don't know of any programmer, professional or otherwise, that writes text in a word processor like this. They usually have a dedicated programmatic text editor, of which a few are Vim or Neovim. These are all the same thing, or even Space Vim. Space Vim is a distribution of Vim. These are all pretty much the same things. They're all in the same vein. V and Vim usually come packaged with a Linux distribution, whereas Neovim and Space Vim, they have to be installed. Another one is Emacs, and there's again Space Max and Doom. These are all the same vein of this Emacs. Doom and Space Max and even Evil Mode just emulates how Vim works. Vim's key bindings, because Emacs's default keys are very hard to work with and get around. So usually people end up changing the layout of Emacs, because hitting Control for everything or Alt for everything, having to hold Alt and Control to do anything, or even in Vim there's an inconvenience about having to hit Escape for everything, because it's like one of the furthest away keys, and you have to hit it with your pinky. So you would want it to be closer to your pinky, at least. So a lot of people remap caps lock to be an escape key, and they'll remap a different key combination to be caps lock. So for me, if I hit both shifts at the same time, my keys are in caps lock, and then in order to get out of that, and that's all keys, even my number keys are in caps lock. Again, I guess I don't know, I don't think that's how caps lock normally works. I haven't used caps lock in a very long time, but in order to get out of that, I just have to type shift again and it goes back to normal. And then if I hit caps lock, it's an escape, but I also have it mapped to, if it's held, it's a control, because again, controls are kind of in an inconvenient place. And if you look on older keyboards, caps lock wasn't there. It was a control key. And really, it's a prime real estate key that is very seldomly used. I don't know a lot of people who type in caps lock for anything on a regular basis. So you might not even use caps lock. It's a very odd design choice to have it where it is. So these are what I would call text editors. Whereas there's another vein of processing applications that are designed, that integrate your terminal, your text editor, your debugger, which is something that helps you find errors in your code, a file browser, all together. And those things are called integrated development environments, or IDEs. Common ones you'll find nowadays is VS Code, Visual Studio, let's see, Eclipse. No, that's not how you spell Eclipse. I can't spell Eclipse. My brain's broken. It's called Eclipse. I'll just put E. Eclipse. IntelliJ? It depends. Like, even some editors only support certain languages. On Mac, you have Xcode. There's a lot of them. There's PyCharm. So Xcode is for programming anything revolving around the Apple ecosystem, whereas VS is usually, or Visual Studio is more for Windows. But you can do, it supports a lot of programming languages, but mostly it's a development IDE for Windows, working with Windows things. And you'll see that on Linux, there are a few that are on Linux, such as Qt Creator, KDE, Code Blocks. So these ones are usually more often used on Linux, but if you're on Linux, it's usually better to just do things in the terminal. And even if on Windows, you probably will do VS Code is works everywhere. I even have it on this machine. So I'm going to switch to a different window and open it. So this is VS Code. This is what it looks like, Visual Studio Code. And apparently they had an update. So this is what you'll see. And you can get a terminal by going to View. I normally do the key bindings for these, so bear with me for a sec. Terminal, new terminal, okay. So yeah, and then you have your terminal. You can do everything in here that you were doing in the terminal emulator. So, and you can change what shell you're in over here. Apparently it didn't load all of them. You have to configure it. Just like with configuring how time prints, you have to configure how the languages that get, or the scripting languages that get loaded into here. But we won't be using VS Code. If you prefer to use VS Code, that's fine. If you prefer terminal, that's okay. Whatever you need to use, or even if you want to use a word processor, whatever you want to use to get the job done, that's all that matters. The efficiency and productivity in which you can do the work. And if you're more productive using this, then by all means. Anybody that has anything to say about that is kind of like an iconoclastic zealot, in my opinion. Do whatever you want. So, whenever I work, I typically use Vim or Neovim. They've become pretty indistinguishable, because when Neovim came out, a little bit of history. When Neovim came out, it kind of shook up Vim, because it was calling itself like the future of Vim, because Vim is primarily worked on and controlled by a single person who dictates how things can go, whether or not a feature can be put into the program or not. And it's a very old program. I think it might be close to 40-year-old program. Whereas Neovim is maybe 5 years old, 6 years old. Not very old at all. But it's worked on by a consortium of people who work together. And they call the person that dictates the program a benevolent dictator for life. And there are a few programs that, even though they're open source and you can see them, do whatever you want with the source code, editing it to the official, like, primary program of which you can download and do whatever you want with, you can hack away at Vim all you want. But if you want a feature put back into Vim, that person has the final say. That isn't the case for Neovim. And because of that, they're able to integrate a lot of features really fast, whereas any feature that's going into Vim has to be reviewed by the benevolent dictator. And usually that causes it to be slow, because they have an idealistic wanting for how the program works, whereas these people, they're just like, I want a bunch of cool features. And so when Neovim came along, Vim was shooken because they don't want to be supplanted by a different program. So they were forced to integrate a lot of the new features that were in Neovim, such as being able to open a terminal inside of Vim. That wasn't a thing before Neovim. And being able to do asynchronous operation. And we can discuss what asynchronous is at a later date. I'm just mentioning these things as a fact. So whenever I program, I tend to use Vim and Neovim. They've become, the differences between the two are very hard to spot nowadays. So if I save this file and close this program, we can use Vim to now look at this program. And so you can see exactly what I was typing. Well, you see a few characters like this. These just denotes a tab character. So this was a tab. A tab was inserted here. And these are just things I need to see as a programmer. If anybody's interested, we can go through how Vim actually works and how you use it. But it is just a text editor. It puts text in, it edits text, it moves text. That's all it does. It's a text editor. Same as your word processor. Except I can do it in the command line. I don't have to leave the command line to do it. So, if we cat the file again, we can see everything we were working on. But now we have to introduce a programming language. And now we were already using a programming language, which was Bash or Zish. These two things have a programming language, or scripting languages. But normally you don't use these in an introductory course for programming in university. They'll usually give you Python, which is a programming language. So if you type Python into your terminal, if you have Python installed, on Windows, I don't think it's default installed. On Mac, Apple, on an Apple computer, it is installed. It's a default installed package. On Linux, it depends. It's not certainly going to be there because usually they use Bash, but it could be. So if it's not installed, you can go and download it from their website. Just go to python.org and you can download it. Should be one of the dominant things here. Yeah, downloads. So you can just download it for Mac or Windows, but again, it's probably already installed on Mac. Mac had 2.x installed by default, but 2.x has been deprecated. Python 2 has been deprecated. So everybody should be moving to 3. I think it's the end of this year that they're not supporting it anymore. So you should just use 3. So if you go to downloads and then you go to whatever system you're using and download it, I think it'll look default. Oh, so right here, just go to Windows if you're on Windows. Probably you're on Windows. Statistically, you're on Windows. And this is the last supported 2.7 version. Whereas 2.9.1 is the most recent release for version 3. So you download it, and you've installed it. And you follow the directions, and you type it in, and then you type Python in your terminal, and you get this prompt. It's a different prompt, you can notice. So Python is also a scripting language, just like Bash. In fact, the difference between the two is very hard to spot at all. If you weren't given this general information here, you would see the same 3 characters. They're not in color, so it's very hard to tell. So you might even try to type echo or something. So if you say echo in here, you're going to get this stuff, and it's going to be like, what the heck is echo? I don't know what echo is. It's like, but I was just using it. What about man? Man echo. I don't know. Oh, still different. Invalid syntax. But you're doing this earlier. So what does it mean to call both of these things scripting languages? Well, that means that they're interpreted by a program. So who's interpreting Python? Well, Python interprets Python. Python itself has its Python has itself a program that listens to commands you're typing, I guess is a way to say it. So this is kind of difficult to... So we're going to type quit. This will just get us out of there. You can also... one thing I didn't discuss is common keyboard commands that are interpreted by the terminal. So if I say again sleep, say sleep for 1,000 seconds, it'll do this thing where I can't run commands anymore because it's on this command. It won't allow me to input another command until this command is finished. So common ways to get out of this are to press the control button and C. This sends what's called an interrupt to the current running process, which was sleep, and says you're done, basically, and lets you get back to writing commands again. Echo hello. Another one is D, Control D, which is kind of like it's not an interrupt, but it's more like a kill. Like it tells it you're not a thing anymore. And usually you can't do that to a signal or a process that's already running. It has to be something that's waiting for input, I guess you could say. Like if I type bash here is waiting for input. So if I press Control D, it tells it exit, which is essentially you're done. And we've typed exit before. Again, if I do it here in Zish, it'll close my terminal because that's the last one. Because remember, exit is it causes the shell to exit. So that's the command that gets input whenever you press Control D. But you can't do that to sleep, because sleep doesn't interpret that exit command. But Python does. So if you type Python and you want to get out of here, at any point you want to get out of here, you press Control D and that'll get you out. But Control C doesn't. It sends an interrupt, but there's no process waiting. There's no process occurring besides Python. So you could do some other things that I don't think are pertinent to what we're doing right now. But there are ways to get out of here other than those, such as exit, which is what Control D was. There are other ways to get out of here. So I think I've been going long enough for this video. We've gotten to, so just to cover what we've talked about, we've finished what apropos does, and we've seen that apropos doesn't seem to be very good at parsing, and maybe that's my issue because I'm not using it correctly, but I don't normally use apropos in the first place. I usually look it up on the internet. So apropos. We also talked about the cat command, which just concatenates. We also talked about editors. The editor I'll be using is Vim. And we introduced Python. So this might not be as much as last time, but these are kind of much more complicated, especially Vim and Python. I could do hours and hours about Vim, and we're probably going to do hours about Python. Apropos, take or leave. It's a tool to look up. And if you don't have a bunch of programs installed like I do, you'd probably get a shorter list than what we were seeing, because a lot of those are because of programs I have installed. They've installed their own programs in the package that I've installed, and that just has made it more complicated to parse. But cat and Vim and Python you will commonly use if you're working in the command line. And so in the next video we'll go over Python a little bit and actually get started working in Python. Until then, I'll see y'all in the next video.